You didn't have to come for me. That was so kind of you. Thank you
I know.
so much.
Just wanted to be supportive of you, Rabbi Rothwachs.
Thank you.
Go ahead here.
You didn't have to come for me. That was so kind of you. Thank you.
David, it's been a while.
In a really long time.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
This is my sister, Chavie.
Oh, wow. What a small world.
Yep.
You're on mute, but you know that. Okay.
You're doing good things, David. I see the things you're doing at the OU. Kol hakavod. It's been a while since July in Jerusalem.
It's a public forum, but I'd love to share stories, catch up. Very funny how
not in this setting. Yes, I get that.
Have crossed and things are That was a very consequential summer for many people.
Yes, agreed. Talk to you soon.
Just head backstage after the show. Rabbi Rothwachs, do you want to be a Yeki? 8:15?
This is your show. You tell me.
Hi.
I
was once the rabbi of a Yeki shul that became a Persian shul. Enabled me to tell.
You just had 2 hours exactly, and you're good.
Exactly 2 hours late.
Yeah. So we could be generous and give till 8:16, but unless you have waited longer in the past, we probably should.
Not by choice.
Okay. Yeah. You let me know. I don't know if there's anything that needs to happen before I start, or if you. Okay. Like I said,
make sure the makeup is ready and the lights.
Okay.
Muted. It's not muted yet.
Okay. It's 8:16. We're good?
8:16, we're good. So I just Shavua Tov to everybody. A happy I guess we're deep into good winter. A good almost spring. Be'ezus Hashem. Welcome to In Conversation. Very excited that everyone's here yet again. Just wanted again to thank the idea havers, the spearheaders, Mr. Henry Orlinsky, Rabbi Shai Shachter, Rabbi Ari Zatz, for pulling this together. Seven weeks worth of motzoei Shabbos programming, and Baruch Hashem been getting actually emails from other people who were not part of the original 7. You got to talk to this rabbi, you got to talk to this person. It'd be great if you are one of these people who feels very strongly that the 8th program is really, X, Y, and Z. Please feel free to reach out to any of the aforementioned organizers or myself. It's my last name, pardo@ou.org. In the meantime, happy, proud, humble to introduce Rabbi Larry Rothwachs, who will take care of the rest of the introductions. If you have questions for Rabbi Rothwachs or for Chavie Knapp, please drop them in the chat box. They'll see them, and bechavod.
Thank you very much, David, and to everyone at the OU and for all those who have organized tonight's event. It truly is an honor and a privilege to be able to participate in this great series. And it's a great honor to be joined this evening by Chavie Knapp. It should be obvious by now, because it's sort of the way this program is built, that Chavie and I daven in the same shul, as we have now for over 18 years. But the truth is, my relationship with Chavie and her husband Stephen goes back well over 30 years at this point. Chavie, as you will get a little sense in a moment, is an incredibly gifted individual. She's an attorney, a social worker, homemaker, and I would describe her, I hope her kids would agree, I'm sure they would, as a super mom who's involved not only in her kids' lives, but really in helping them develop their careers as well, which is a discussion in of itself for another time. She and her husband, Stephen, play an integral role in our community in many ways, and we feel very fortunate to have them with us. This evening, we're going to focus on a particular event in Chavie's life, which has impacted her, as well as the members of her family, most profoundly. Tonight's conversation is not scripted in any way, but I, for one, am very much hoping that we will walk away inspired in many ways, despite the very tragic circumstances which make up the subject of tonight's discussion. I'm hopeful that there is a lot of positive messaging that we can take away from our conversation. Each and every one of us have been impacted by terrorism in one way or another. Over the course of the past several generations, we have seen terrorism rear its head in every imaginable and unimaginable shape and form, from up close and far. And we have all seen the devastating consequences of terrorist activity and the cowardly acts of terrorism that have seared feelings and images in our minds and our hearts that are indelible, as they should be. But some of us have been impacted more directly than others. And in April of 1995, Chavie was visiting Israel, as so many of us and our children have and will. And on that particular fateful day, her life was changed forever. And at this point, I would like to direct the spotlight, if you will, towards Chavie. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and hoping that you can share more with us, sort of taking us to that day, to that moment, enabling us to gain more of an understanding into the background of this conversation that we are about to have. Thank you, Chavie.
Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Rabbi Rothwachs. I'm actually used to signing onto Zoom and just watching you for hours on end. So it's a little bit of a different experience being on the other side and also joining you. So thank you. And thanks for that introduction. Thanks for inviting me. I think one of the things that people have definitely approached me and asked me about over the course of this pandemic is when you've been through something that's really traumatic, the question is, how did you get through it? And what kind of takeaways have you brought away from the event with you? And I think even during this pandemic, people are constantly wondering, how is this going to affect all of us? What are the long-term effects going to be on me, on the community, on the world at large? And I think that one of the things that I always think about is instead of asking that question in a passive way, what are the effects going to be on me and on the world, is those effects are really in our control. How things and events affect us and how the pandemic is going to be affecting us long term, that's really in our control. We are the ones who are in control of how experiences and events and a pandemic is going to have its long-lasting effect on us. And so it's a really, really important question, not just to ask, but to take ownership over that question. How we are going to actively, how we're going to walk away from an event, and that's really in our control. So it's something that's an important thing to explore and to discuss and to process, so that the aftermath can really be less harsh and more meaningful. So I'm happy to begin the discussion if there's anything specific you want me to discuss or talk about or to start off with.
Right. So I actually really appreciate that. I won't have to make a note of it. I'm going to make a mental note to come back, because I would very much love to hear, I think all of us would, to be able to sort of draw from whatever inspiration you can provide us with your own personal experiences and apply it to a difficult situation in which we find ourselves right now. I think each and every one of us could decide for ourselves, after hearing a little more about your story, how it ranks relative to coming as close as you did to death in just a horrific attack that you lived through. But regardless of how it ranks relative to that, there's no question that this is a difficult time. And I thank you so much for fulfilling that which I had said from the outset. I hope that tonight we will be able to walk away with a sense of sort of a positive message that we can take and learn, and already to tell us from the outset that the short and long-term effects of things that we experience in life are much more in our control than we sometimes think, is already, a very inspiring and a very empowering thought. So without putting you on the spot, but then again, you signed up for this, or you so graciously agreed, I should say, maybe just take us a little bit back to April of 1995. I am not going to probe for more details that you want to share, but just, take us there, give us just a little bit of the background, so, we can appreciate, what it is that you lived through, what you survived, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background, I had graduated from Stern, and a whole bunch of us were not really ready yet to commit to what we wanted to do when we grew up. So we decided to go to Israel for the year and spend the year learning. I was planning on going to law school, and I just wanted to take another gap year, just, in addition to the gap year I had taken after high school, just to, really just enjoy and hang out with friends and do some learning before I went to NYU Law School. So one of our fellow community members, Adina Merfeld, was my roommate that year. We got an apartment, and we were joined in January by a new roommate, Elisa Flato, and we became really, really fast friends with her. And we were having a great time. We were having lots of company for Shabbos. There was a really nice singles community there. And a lot of us had come from America together to spend the year. So fast forward a little bit. So basically, a friend of mine and myself, not one of my roommates, but a friend of mine and myself, had decided that we're going to stay in Israel for Pesach that year. Our year in Israel, we had come home, and we really wanted to experience it in Israel. So before Pesach started, we decided to go on a little spa vacation together to Gush Katif. It was 95, so it was before Gush Katif was a dangerous spot, and we decided to go to a spa for a couple of days. And Elisa was my roommate, and a couple of days before I was going to leave with my other friend, Elisa's plans had fallen through. She was supposed to go to Egypt with a friend before Pesach for a few days, and she asked if she could join our trip. And we said, of course you could join our trip. So the morning we were going to leave, Elisa and I, we went to the main bus station, and we were supposed to be taking a bus that was going to take us to Ashkelon, and then another bus from Ashkelon to Gush Katif. It was a connecting bus. And we made plans to get on a specific bus, and for whatever reason, that bus didn't work out for us to get on that bus, and we ended up taking the second bus that was going to be going to Ashkelon, and we watched the first bus pull out, and we got on the second bus, and we traveled to Ashkelon. The three of us traveled to Ashkelon, and then we got to Ashkelon, and we had some time in between the next connecting bus, and we hung out in the mall, and we were joking around together, and we were talking about our families, and then we got on the connecting bus from Ashkelon to Gush Katif, and I vividly remember getting on the bus, and I was putting our luggage on the bus, and I got onto the bus, and there were three of us. So, as most people, most women know, there can ends up being a lot of drama when it's three girls together. If two of them are leaving one of them out, or if one of them is leaving two of them out, and so I sort of like chose my seat carefully because I wanted to make sure that neither of them were going to be upset at me for not sitting with them. And so I let them sit together, and I just sat behind them next to an Israeli soldier. It was a bus that was coming back from a weekend where a lot of the soldiers had off for this free weekend, and they were all coming back to be back on base. So it was basically the three of us, an elderly couple, and a bus full of chayalim, full of Israeli soldiers. And as the bus made a couple of stops along the way, a lot of very happy, very excited soldiers who were just coming back from a nice long weekend with their families or friends, and they were going back to work. They would be coming onto the bus, and I vividly remember I had like my Lucas bag, my black and yellow luggage that we all used in those days. That was in the aisle in the bus, and some of the soldiers were getting on. It was a very full bus. There were no more seats, and the soldiers were sort of just all standing in the aisle and laughing and having a good time. And I must have fallen asleep while the bus was going, and all of a sudden I just felt like a tremendous, like crazy feeling, and then opened up my eyes and just saw like just gray particles like whizzing by. And all of a sudden I just saw Elisa like fall over in the seat in front of me, and everybody was just screaming and yelling, and there was I looked behind me and I saw soldiers screaming, and there was a lot of like blood everywhere, and people were just screaming and yelling, "There's a war, get off the bus." And whoever could started getting down and just crawling off the bus, and we just crawled onto like a desert ground basically, and we had no idea what was going on. I mean, the first thing I could think of was I hope I'm going to be okay, because I don't know how my mother is going to get through this if I'm not. And I, we got off the bus, and I was just really, really worried about Elisa. I didn't understand if there was a war going on, what we were supposed to do. And it was an entirely like, I mean, there was no suicide bomber at the time, so we didn't even think about what it could be. We thought it was a land war. And there were probably about like 5 or 6 of us that were not badly injured, and they quickly sort of whisked us away and took us to the nearby community near Gush Katif, and they let us make a couple of phone calls, and I was just really, really concerned about Elisa. I called one of my ex-boyfriends, and I called my sister Shoshana, who had just gotten married to her husband Yitzi, and they allowed us these 2 phone calls, and she said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "No, I really don't think so. I think Elisa's really badly hurt, and I don't know what's going on, and I have to get off the phone. I can't really talk to you. I'm only allowed this 1 phone call, and I'm with these people who have no money, and they're just," and it was just a complete whirlwind. I mean, she basically went over to my parents' house to try to explain to them that something had happened. They don't really know what happened, and we were trying to figure out like what was going on with Elisa. And I mean, I guess everybody knows, like, the story did not end well. Elisa had been very badly hurt. She had been hit by shrapnel, and it was just, there was a lot of Tehillim that was said, and we were praying so hard for her. And And it did not have a good ending. So it was the first suicide bomber who basically rammed itself into this bus, specifically wanted to get a bus that was full of Israeli soldiers and basically do as much damage as they possibly could. And we ended up going to the Soroka Hospital, to see Elisa and try to just help identify like who she was. And, it was just, I think back now and it was just, you don't think these types of things are going to happen to you. It was like living a nightmare. I mean, you read about these things in the news, but you don't imagine that your little decision to go on a trip is going to affect, people's lives and it's going to have it could be such, it could end in such tragedy. And I think, there were so many things to process about all of this. I mean, it was, the situation with Elisa and the situation of feeling guilty, that, so much guilt about, why did I walk off okay? And there's not really a reason for that, but, the fairness of it all and the bad things happening to good people. And there were so many things that kicked in that, in the past, 25 years since this event, it's definitely taken lots and lots of turns of processing and coming to terms with it and talking to people about it. And, I remember picking my seat. I mean, that's one of the things that I still remember very, very vividly. I mean, I guess, memories are, thank God, I mean, some memories are not as vividly remembered as others. And I guess that, God makes that happen for survival purposes. One of the things that I remember very vividly is choosing my seat very carefully. And I think for a very long time, I was just trying to come to terms with, oh my gosh, like was somebody trying to do that for me? Was there it was just such a very specific decision that I made. And if somebody had said to me, choose your seat really, really carefully now, because that is going to have such an impact on how things play out, I don't think I could have chosen a more lucky seat. So, but on the other hand, it's been, it's hard to grapple with, but why did that have to happen to Elisa, and how, God's actions, come in, and which part was our choice and which part was, for some reason, this had to happen. And, I think that, a lot of these things have been years and years and years of processing and getting a lot of support from family and friends and a community. And I think, the communal piece is so important here. And I know that for myself with this pandemic, I look around and I know from experience how important community is and how important family and friends are in having gotten me through this. And I recognize like the beauty of the community right now in all of us being there for each other in this pandemic, because it's so crucial in terms of getting through it. I mean, some of the same questions that I've grappled with individually are being dealt with in the community now by our kids, by ourselves, by our schools. Why is this happening? Like, what I'm pinching ourselves. Is this really happening? Like almost a year later, we're still in this situation. And I think it's the same pinching feeling that I felt at the time. Like, is this real? I mean, I still wake up even now with the pandemic and say, wait, is this COVID thing real? Or is this just a dream and I'm waking up and it was just, like a dream that felt like it took a year last night? And I think a lot of those same things that I felt, I think we're all feeling now with the pandemic. And I look around and I remember how lucky I was and how lucky our community is that we have each other to process now and to get through this.
So maybe I'll jump in now, not because I want to interrupt you. If anything, I think each and every one of us are stunned, not because you've told us anything that we didn't know. I think some of us know you better than others. Lisa Flato's name is a name that we all know. I actually went to elementary school with Elisa. I was not as close with her as you. I do remember, it was not even a month after my own wedding, attending her Levi in West Orange in the shul, and obviously that's a moment that I will never forget. But your story obviously is compelling on so many levels, and there's so much to unpack. But since you've once again, and I appreciate what you're doing, sort of made the connection for us, which, by the way, I appreciate you doing, because I would have had to do so much more cautiously, and I would have been, frankly, I would have been concerned about perhaps even offending you. I know that you're not easily offended, but to just go ahead and say, well, you experienced this and we're experiencing this, and, can you help us draw an analogy? But since you've done that already twice, I think it's important to mention the fact that two things. Number one, you have had the benefit of 25 plus years to process it. And that's a word that you've used, through, I'm sure, many different channels, and with the assistance and support of many people. In addition, you have had sort of the benefit of being embraced by a community that didn't necessarily have to deal with the trauma and the impact of what you did. And to a certain extent, that's very different than all of us, yourself included, in terms of what we are experiencing right now. Notwithstanding the fact that, again, the experiences on a certain level have to be compared, with a lot of, they are very, very different, but we are all experiencing this together. And we don't necessarily have that natural support of the other. And it certainly hasn't been 25 years. So, maybe I think actually it would be helpful for all of us to just sort of hear from you, without necessarily going through all of the details, but the sort of the stages of recovery, if that's the right word, or just being able to sort of assimilate and learn to live with trauma over the course of years. I'm sure the first few days were different than the weeks that followed, and the months that followed, and the years that followed. And sometimes we don't appreciate how time can be, an incredible healer. As you said, memory is a gift. And I can't call it a curse, but it's something that could, can keep us tethered to experiences that, we really want to be freed from. So remind us all, for whatever it is that we are holding on to. This looking right now, there are 189 people listening. I'm sure that some of us have experienced trauma outside of this pandemic that we are still living with in a very, very real way. Remind us, if you will, through your own experiences, how much hope there is for people to be able to recover, and how maybe to access that, if it's not necessarily obvious to each and every one of us at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important piece. One of the things is just one of the things that I've learned is just to try to be forgiving to yourself, and just, I sort of always have this reminder in my head, that, like, instead of being hard on myself for certain things, if I'm dropping the ball on certain things, where I feel like I have a perfectionist tendency, so if I'm not doing everything 100%, I'll say to myself, but it's okay. Like, you've been through a lot, and, like, it's enough even that you're just standing here, let alone that you're, not cleaning up the house as well as you might want to, or not doing 100% with your kid one day the way you want to. I think that if we can learn how to be more forgiving, and less sort of competitive with each other in that way, and just accepting of who each other is, I think it's really, really helpful. I've also really tried to, I consider myself to have grown a lot in terms of not being judgmental about other people. I think that I really walk around with a sense of, like, you don't know what the person next to you has been through. Even if their Facebook posts look amazing and perfect, or if you ask them how they're doing and they say great, and you're having a really, really bad day, you know, and you think, oh, everyone else is having the life and everything's perfect. It's not. I think that people carry things with them that you really don't know unless you're very, very close with them. And even if you're close with them, a lot of people don't share things that they think will pierce your feeling of, you know, thinking that they're perfect. Or I think that if as a community we can learn to be more accepting and less judgmental of each other, and just a little bit more, you know, sweet and understanding that like the person next to you might be going through something really, really, really hard. And, you know, just a smile or a welcoming, how are you, could really, really pick them up on a hard day. I think that's something that I really try. I think just, you know, unconsciously have worked on. And just through the experience, I just feel like I've grown a lot in that way. You know, especially in our community where, I mean, generally it's so supportive, but I think there's still a feeling of trying to keep up with the Joneses, whether it's religiously or socially, or academically. And I think, you know, some days I just feel lucky to be alive. Like it doesn't, like I don't really matter. It doesn't matter really, like the like little details of how we differ from each other. It's just we should feel lucky that we can have friends and have a community like this, and then the details can come later. So that's something that I think could be like a helpful takeaway. I've also, I think I've also tried to like just live life to the fullest as much as I can. Like things that think people think I'm doing with my kids might be crazy, but for me, it's like you only live once, and if they have a passion for something, then I'd love for them to be able to do it and be happy and feel good about themselves. And just I feel very privileged that I was able to like, you know, not lose my life that day and be able to raise a family with 5 kids and just have happy kids. It's just like so meaningful to me. So I think like that's something, even with this pandemic for the community, just, you know, like a lot of people have not made it out of the pandemic and have gotten sick, and, you know, just appreciating that we're healthy and that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And once we come out of that, hoping that, you know, we can continue working on feeling grateful that it's over and that we've had the support through it and we haven't been alone. And if there are people that are alone, that we should reach out to them and help them through it also. You know, but there have been times that I've, you know, committed myself to doing something that I wouldn't have done otherwise, to sort of just, you know, help myself feel like I've gotten something good out of it. There must be a reason that I've been given a second life. And I think that, you know, when you do something that's out of the ordinary, it at least makes you feel like something positive can come out of like a real tragedy or some really harsh experiences. For myself, one of the things that I've, you know, been trying to do during the course of the pandemic is reconnect with friends, like very, very good friends that I love and we've been there for each other over the years. I've been really making a concerted effort to get together and take walks or just go for outdoor coffee and just share what we're going through instead of just saying, how are you doing? Everyone, oh, I'm fine, everything's good. I think to really reconnect with friends that we could talk to each other and say what's hard, because things are hard. It's not easy right now. Nobody has it easy. Even if, you know, it seems like they do, they don't. And so it's definitely helped me to do that. And I think people are happy to reconnect during this time.
You are very difficult to interrupt, I have to say. Yeah. I'm not a professional interviewer, but I have been trying to jump in.
Sorry.
And no, that's okay. That's okay. You know, as a rabbi, I often process things that I hear and read through the lens of, this is good drasha material. You know, in your past response, I think you basically ran through probably 7 or 8 Yom Kippur Yizkor drashas, and I can literally break it down. I'm not going to do it. The recording is available if you want to go back and listen to that very, very profound answer. But, you know, really bulleted, you know, incredibly inspiring points, points that were not obvious. I'm not going to take you back to the question that I asked you, but I was actually asking you to talk more about your, how you personally have processed trauma, but every response that you gave really reflected outwards, just in terms of perspectives on life and the gifts that you've been given and your interactions with other people, and not being judgmental and putting things in perspective and making the most of every day, which is really, really amazing. I mean, it's literally sort of turning your fate into destiny and saying, I'm not, like you said when you started, which was amazing. I'm not going to look at things in terms of, well, what are the effects? I'm going to determine, what the effects are going to be, which is really, really amazing. I'm curious. First of all, Chavie and I spoke for about 3 minutes yesterday, and she said you could ask any questions you want. So, I mean, that was basically our prep for this interview. So I don't think this is a deeply personal question, but I'm just going to state for the record, please don't answer anything you don't want to. Do you process news about a terrorist attack differently than you imagine I would? I have never, experienced firsthand, an act of terror. My father was actually in the World Trade Center, not on 9/11, but in the first bombing in '93. That was sort of the closest, that I have ever, felt to terror. Like many of us, I know people, at least it was one of them and others who unfortunately were killed or seriously injured in a terrorist attack. So obviously when we hear of an attack here in Eretz Israel, it affects us a certain way. Some of us naturally are just a little more, we're just more compassionate, towards the suffering of others, even from a distance. But what happens to you, when you hear? And I would even go a step further, if I'm going to ask the question already. If you hear about a terrorist attack in another country, in a country in which we, other than the fact that, we're all part of one, global community, we don't really have any connection with people who, we don't interact with, people of different faiths, different, people speak different languages. Some of us, sometimes we hear, news of a terrorist attack, a bus bombing, and unfortunately it goes in one ear and out the other. It doesn't impact us at all. I'm just curious, what happens when you hear those news?
So I turn off the TV if I'm watching TV, because I don't like to watch it on the news. And then I will generally read about it in the paper or go online at like 3 o'clock in the morning when I feel like it's my safe zone. It's very hard for me to read the news right when it happens, when it's like a terror event. I also am a part of a group called Strength to Strength, which is run by Sari Singer, which is extraordinarily helpful to me. There are a lot of us who get together once a year and basically have one long weekend of support groups and conversations. It's a lot of 9/11 victims. It's Israel terror victims. Sari Singer runs the group. It's an incredible group. I mean, I highly recommend it for anyone who's watching this, who's been through any terror events. It's become a family. We're all one family. We have a really big WhatsApp group, and it's a very, very supportive, non-judgmental group that is so meaningful and so therapeutic. And generally when something happens on the news, one of the members will inevitably WhatsApp the group, and then we'll end up in a conversation about it. And it's much easier to talk about it and process it with other people who have been through similar things, who understand the trauma of like reliving it. And so that's what I'll end up doing. I'll end up processing it with one of the members of the group and talking it through together. And sometimes we'll end up reaching out to the victims, the new victims, and, sort of welcoming them into this group. It's not a group that anyone wants to be part of, but they become part of it because of the incident. And we've actually gotten very, very close with, Oklahoma City bombing victims and lots and lots of the Boston Marathon victims. And, as each event happens, unfortunately, the group grows. And that's how we all work through it together. So every time there is a terror event, that strength to strength family becomes bigger. And I guess that's how everybody ends up processing it together, even with the new victims. And that, that's something that has been really, really helpful when a new, some kind of new event happens that creates a lot of like difficulties with processing. So
are you more protective as a parent, specifically? I mean, not only regarding travel to Israel, but are you able to parent your kids as objectively as you think one should? I'm being very careful how I'm asking the question, because not all parents agree in terms of how much independence their kids could have. But knowing, as you pointed out, knowing how sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, your life can change forever. Does that influence your parenting choices?
good question. Yes, it does. I get very, very nervous sometimes. I mean, for no reason. Like my kids, I mean, my kids know they have to text me when they're walking to school themselves, or even now. Well, and they never walked themselves before they were teenagers, but still, I get very nervous sometimes if all of a sudden I feel like, uh-oh, I don't know if they got to school okay. There have been times that I've actually called Y and J and said, I just want to make sure my kids are in school. I do have Life 360 on my phone, which my kids do not love that I have that, but it helps me tremendously because now that Amalia's driving, and once in a while she'll get to school and forget to text me that she's there, and I have my Life 360 telling me she's at Frisch, it really puts me at ease. And my kids don't love that I have it, but I said to them, too bad. Like this, I'm doing. It's a parent decision, and it just makes me feel better that I know I don't need to know every single thing they're doing, but I need to know they've gotten to their destination. Otherwise, I get very, very nervous. So yes, it does, make a difference. When Amalia went to Israel on Yad B'Yad after 10th grade, Amalia's my oldest. She's 17 now. When she went to Israel, it was very, very hard for me. And Steve said, we have to let her go. So the way that I actually dealt with it was I didn't look at her schedule on a day-to-day basis. I knew where she was, but if you asked me where exactly she was at any minute of the day, I couldn't even tell you, because I felt like the only way I could keep calm about it was not to know every second what the itinerary was. And as funny as it might sound to some people, for me, it just worked, because otherwise I would have been like frantic the whole summer, and it actually helped me. So I feel more prepared for her to go to Israel next year for the year, knowing that that I made it through that summer with her there and not knowing every single second where she was.
I think it's amazing. It's an amazing point to highlight, because in general, we're all better off if we know what our triggers are, if we know what makes us most afraid and vulnerable, and if we can acknowledge that and then come up with coping skills that work. They're not going to be the same for every parent or every person. I imagine there are certain parents who, if faced with the same experiences that you have, perhaps for them, they would need to know exactly where their child is at every time. And there's no right or wrong. It's just you need to know what works for you. And again, I don't want to come back to it again. It's just inspiring to listen to you, because we wouldn't judge you. Just as you said, you don't judge others. We wouldn't judge you if you said, listen, I can't allow my children to go to Israel. But we would feel bad for your children, because they would unfortunately sort of be suffering, the consequences of your experience. But instead, you've made the courageous choice to figure out how I could make it work for them while not, being miserable myself. And that's amazing. That's amazing. And, that ability to sort of adapt is something that we can all learn from. There's a question here, which I wouldn't have asked, but someone else has, and thankfully it's directed to you. This is a question that sometimes people ask rabbis, but in this case, you're being asked to comment. Many of us question why so many good people were taken from our community during this pandemic, and many of us feel a sense, some level of guilt. Would you want to comment on this? So I'm actually, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to say, but I'm just going to start, because I can't help it, by saying what I don't think Chavie will do, and I don't think she should do, although she may if she wants, and that is to even attempt to explain things that we can't explain. Explain the things that don't really have an explanation that we can't understand. The question of why certain people die in a pandemic and others don't. Obviously, we can look at specific cases, and there may be, very clear situational scientific explanations as to why someone died and another one didn't. But when you take a step back and you look at the staggering numbers of people who have been taken from us within our community, within the country, and around the world, so clearly, this is in the realm of what Chazal say, "Bahadi kavshet d'Rachmana lamalach." We just don't have access to this information, which is designed. But the focus over here, the question is one that I think is one that you can focus on, and that's the guilt factor, because there's something known as survivor's guilt. You alluded to it earlier, but maybe we can come back to it right now. You survived, and a very close friend of yours did not. Some of us may not even understand what that means. Actually, I'm going to go back to my father again. The closest I ever got to survivor's guilt, my father, he's talking about 9 lives. He was also on a train. Some of you may remember this incident also about 25 years ago, more or less. Around the same time, there was a train that was derailed near Hoboken, New Jersey. And there were 2 fatalities. One of whom was a member of our community in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, David Stern, alav shalom. My father was on that train. He was not seriously injured, but also, suffered for a long time afterwards of, as having the survivor's guilt. We are all survivors right now. We are all survivors because there are members of our community who have died in the past 9 months, who were living life healthily, freely, comfortably, and things changed for them, just like that. So maybe, as the question coming from Aaron R. Is as directed to you, maybe Chavie, you can help give us some direction, some thoughts as to how, how to manage that and how to survive, not being, held back by guilt, but being able maybe to, to feel, like you said, sort of a sense of purpose. Maybe you can share, some of your thoughts and perspectives on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's really, really tough one. There's 2 pieces to it. One is that, one is like what you said, that at some point when we just don't have answers to these questions, I guess I just turn to myself and say, so then I must have a sense of purpose. Like there must be a sense of purpose, not that somebody else did not deserve that extra life to live, but that the fact that I have had that gift to be able to continue living, what do I do to find purpose in my life to really make meaning of being given that gift? The first piece is a lot harder, and at some point, when I think about it, I just have to stop thinking about it because we don't have the answers to that, and nobody will, whether it's the biggest Rav in any community, whether it's the biggest philosopher, whether it's the best writer. None of us can ever have an answer to that question of why some people and not others. And I think, as cliched as it is, I think that, I'll speak for myself, like I just don't, I can't see the full picture, whether it's God, whether it's God and the world, whether it's God and the choices we make. We see like our little piece of it. We're not capable of seeing the entire picture and why things have to happen the way they do, and why, if something hadn't happened, something worse would have happened if that hadn't happened. It's just, these answers are not humanly possible. And so we can think and think and think and think and think. And sometimes my head gets tired of thinking, and I know I'm not going to come up with the answers. And so I have to just turn into myself and say, so what do I do with what I was given? And how can I be nicer to people, or how can I be less judgmental of people, or how can I, what can I do to make the most of what I've been given? because the rest of it we can, we can come up with possible answers, but we'll never know what the reasons are. And I honestly, I had a really, really, really difficult time. One of the most difficult times that I had was when everyone was saying Tehillim for Elisa, because it was really, really hard for me. I mean, I still have a very hard time with Tehillim because, to me, I just felt like saying Tehillim was asking for a miracle. Like I saw her get hit, but like I had no choice but to believe in tefillah. It's the only thing we can do sometimes is to say Tehillim, because there are things that God can do and God can change with the power of prayer that we just don't understand. And as much as I didn't understand it from a human perspective, but I saw her get hit, and how is Tehillim going to help? Sometimes prayer is the only way to go, because that's all we can do is to pray and hope. And sometimes there are miracles and things turn around, and sometimes there aren't. But I guess, praying, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, prayer is, like helps us, because it's the only real thing that we can do that we feel like will help us feel less guilty afterwards because we tried. And so I think, prayer, whether it's in shul or saying a prayer to ourselves or to anybody, I think is our human way of dealing with it, to feel like we really tried our best to change things around. And if we can't, then we just have to live with how can we make ourselves better.
There's an eighth Yom Kippur dresser right there, by the way, in case you're keeping. I have a comment, and then another, I would say maybe a final question, although, the floor is still open if anybody wants to submit any questions. First of all, I mentioned earlier how much, we need to admire and commend you for your ability to parent as objectively as you can and allow your children, to have the benefits and the opportunities and the experiences that you would want them to have, despite the fact that, it's so difficult and challenging for you. And I failed to mention, I'm looking right now at my screen, shows your sister right next to you, and that right next to them are your parents who are here with us. And I know your parents well. They're very, very fine, special people. But really, I would say before we admire and commend you, we should also recognize the fact that your parents, and I can't even imagine how difficult this was difficult for them. They, allowed your siblings to go to Israel, to continue to go to Israel. I'm assuming that is the case, even after your experiences. And that's, again, speaks to their strength and your strength as a family. And it's just an amazing thing to be able to, to do what you need to do, to be able to manage, very, very, very difficult and painful emotions, while at the same time protecting people that you love. Easier said than done. I can only imagine, not more than that. I guess the last question that I want to ask you, just curious, your insights. It's also an opportunity for me to sort of make a statement that I want to make, just a reflection. I already said, and to a large extent it's true, that I myself have not been the victim of trauma. That being said, I have experienced things that have been traumatizing. And while I don't think that, we can necessarily compare every trauma to another and every person's trauma to another person, I do think that many of us don't fully appreciate, the impact of trauma that we experience, perhaps just as importantly that other people do. This past summer, I was having a conversation with a woman. I don't want to go into any of the details right now, but she was talking about the trauma that another person in her life had experienced. And she said rather casually or flippantly, he just should just get over it. Everybody experiences trauma, and I'm not going to, talk right now about how I, responded to her then and in conversations that we had thereafter. But I think many of us, sometimes, even if we know better, but certainly if we don't know better, we'll default to that sort of thinking. Some of us will think it and we won't say it. Some of us will say it, but we won't put it in writing. And some of us may put it in writing. My guess is, you want to go back to the pandemic, probably even now, certainly within the realm of social media, people experience things differently. One of the things that we've learned over the past generation or so, maybe some have known it longer than that, is that the impact of trauma can be very, very real. There's actually a book, if I remember correctly, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. It was recommended to me about a year or two ago, and I read it, which talks about the physiological impacts of trauma. And it's really, really, really important for each and every one of us to know and to be sensitive to the fact, even if we don't know from personal experience, we should be grateful for that people who have experienced trauma, really, really can be impacted in very, very serious ways. In some cases, in the worst of situations, they can't recover from it. And that will have a very, very, heavy toll on their life and people who they live with. So, Chavie, again, you have been, an incredible inspiration to each and every one of us. For those of you who are meeting you for the first time tonight, I'm sure very inspired by, who you are and how you present your story. But hoping that maybe you can, just maybe add to this a little bit, because I'm speaking more from the outside than you can, and just, inspire us and remind us and maybe sort of reinforce this idea, not just in the general sense, as you said already, don't be judgmental, but to understand and appreciate that trauma is real. It's not just an idea. It's not just a thought. It's not just a feeling. And it's not just something you can, quote unquote, get over.
Right. Right. I mean, 1,000%. That's something that's just really, really, really important, is to validate. I think that to validate feelings, because feelings are real, and whether or not we agree with someone else's feelings or we don't agree with someone's feelings, I think that validating another person's feelings is so important and so vital in A, treating each other with respect, but B, helping someone through their processing. I mean, I know, I'm not saying this just because you're interviewing me, but I know that, we feel so grateful to be part of the Beth Aaron community. Just, this conversation is nothing new to me, because we've had conversations with you, our rabbi, that are so real and so meaningful, and our concerns are never dismissed, and they're always validated and processed. And I think that, being part of our smaller community of Beth Aaron, where it's a community of really, really a non-judgmental community, where there's so many different types of people and congregants and of all ages, and there's so much respect in the community. There's so many different religious levels, and I don't think one time in the past 18 years have we felt, looked down on or judged. And I think it's such a special, almost like a special haven in this larger community, Beth Aaron. It's such a gift to us. And I think along those same lines, just as any individual in any of the shuls in this community, I think all of us are going through a lot of trauma on many different levels through this pandemic, just trying to deal with it, whether it's the guilt, as somebody asked, or the processing, or trying to understand how our kids are going to make it through, or, cooking all day and not having any, just on so many levels. And everyone's experiencing it in their own way. And I think being able to talk about it and articulate what we're feeling is so helpful, and not judging anybody, because we're having similar trauma, but we're processing it in such different ways, because we're all coming into the trauma with different experiences and different family situations and different job situations and different personalities, that, just to validate each other's feelings going through it, and for sure afterwards, I think is something that's really, really important for us to continue doing as a community. I don't know if you feel that way too, as a communal leader, just even, I'm sure as a leader, like all the leaders of the community are going through trauma too on their own levels. And, I think that, if we recognize that, then it's almost comforting, because we're not alone. I don't think anybody's alone in dealing with the guilt and dealing with the trauma. I think we're all going through this together, and just, the details of how we're affected by it are different, but it's such a communal sharing, that can be really, really helpful in getting through it.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that we're out of time. I can't help but get in the last word. We haven't spoken any Torah tonight. That being said, I think it's a very worthwhile conversation. But since this is, we're all gathered together on Motzoei Shabbos, I'll just say the following. If you haven't had a chance yet to review Parshas Miketz, it's not too late. Parshas Miketz, Vayigash, and Vayichi, certainly the end of Parsha, where the Torah describes the passing and the burial of Yaakov Avinu. You can read it with the through somewhat of a new lens after tonight's conversation. We have to be very, very careful not to reduce and trivialize stories in the Torah. But I think it's fair to say, I don't think anybody would disagree with this on a most simple level, Yosef experienced trauma. Yosef's brothers experienced trauma. They were coming at it from different perspectives. And the way the Torah records in a very, very dramatic way with a lot of detail, everything from the reactions, the thoughts, the tears, really with a lot of detail. In today's Parshas Miketz, Vayigash, reveals a lot. Again, just goes a long way in terms of the validation of what trauma is. But also we could learn a lot in terms of the recovery, the perspectives. I was actually thinking a lot about the ideas that you shared, Chavie, and I don't know if it was consciously so, but Yosef's, clearly his intent to, not to get stuck in the past, and the ability to sort of recognize that, listen, things happened, mistakes were made, acts that perhaps on a certain level were unforgivable, but I'm gonna move on or move forward. Perhaps that's the better way to say it. And I'm gonna take you with me in a good way. And we're gonna move from this. We're gonna grow together, and we're gonna strengthen ourselves, and we're gonna be the better for it. It's really there are many examples that the Torah gives us to remind us that life is a journey. Sometimes as you could never have imagined or dreamed. In April of 1995, you experienced a nightmare the likes of which we can't imagine. But clearly, in the 25 years since, and we hope and pray, for many, many years going forward, it has shaped you and allowed you to form in an extraordinary way. We hope and pray that you continue to have a lot of nachas from your children. We hope that Amalia has a great year in Israel next year, a safe year, together with, please God, all your children in the years to come. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, David, once again for hosting us. This has been really meaningful and enjoyable, and looking forward to more conversations in the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Good Bach, Shavua Tov to all.
Shavua Tov. See you here next week at 8:15 p.m. OU.org/conversations. Next week, Next week is Rabbi Yaakov Trump with Dr. Henry Abramson on false messiahs and their impact. Probably a little bit different than tonight, but but who knows? Thank you, Rabbi Rothwachs. Thank you, Chavie, for what was an incredible program. Anybody wants to check it out later, it's up on OU Torah. Have a Shavua Tov.
OU Torah, okay.
.org.
Thank you for having me.